I took a stroll downtown this evening when I heard music echo through the night. So I started running so I wouldn't be too late. In the neon light, what the music could reveal through the night.
Welcome everyone to Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I'll be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about how to become even more effective at our communication, because communication might not just be, well, I'm going to talk to the person at the grocery store saying, hey, I would like this to put in paper, not plastic. And sometimes we just take what we get. I know for me, I enjoy when I go out to a restaurant, I say, hey, is this table available? Where I'm able to have a conversation with the attendant and say, hey, I would like to sit here. Is that possible? And then sometimes they might say, no, it's not possible. This table is reserved, or we're only serving these tables right now because this is where it's open. So depending on that type of environment, right? But typically I get a yes. They say, yeah, sure thing. If you want to sit there, that's perfectly fine. But many people just sit where they're sat. And I'm not promoting you to go to a restaurant and being a tyrant saying, I want to sit here, and if I can't sit here, I'm leaving. There's a difference between having a conversation with someone, asking for something, and then if it comes your way, great. And if not, not a problem, right? Because we have to figure out, all right, am I communicating with people, or am I just allowing things to happen? And many times, many people just allow things to happen. Let's look at a conversation with your boss. Maybe your boss tells you to do something, to do some work that you might not enjoy. What do you say? Okay, boss, yes, sure. Or do you say, oh, I really enjoyed that last project you did. This one is not as much. And I'm so passionate about this other work that I did that I felt like I can give 100%, or I gave 100%. Now your boss is going to have that in the back of your mind that, okay, well, they don't really like this task, but they enjoy this task. So I'm going to give them more of this task. And when you do that, you communicate it like you like this, you don't like this. Now, at the same time, you're not saying you're not going to do the job, because if you're just going to your boss and saying, I'm not going to do this job, who do you think I am? I'm not going to do something I don't like. Your boss is going to probably say, okay, well, do you want to do the work or not? And if the answer is no, then of course they're going to probably say, well, maybe, it's time we part ways, right? Because the boss or CEO, whoever it is, they're looking for the work to be done. And we do have to understand that, we might not love what we do, but just because we don't love what we do doesn't mean we can't find things that we love and then make our bosses aware, saying, hey, I really enjoy doing this type of work. If you have any more, send it my way. That type of communication is going to be powerful in the sense of, all right, I'm able to communicate with what I want in life. And then eventually it can go into, I would rather do this, and then I know what I don't want, right? So if you're not enjoying a certain job or a certain type of task, then of course you say it versus in just allowing it, because many people who allow things to happen in their life, they are miserable and then they go home and they are unproductive. So we're trying to get out of that habit. And today we're going to be talking with Aden Nepom. She is a playful advisor and communicator. She is not so much necessarily communications coach, more so than a facilitator. She does many things. She has many hats. She worked as an improv instructor, and she goes into businesses as speakers, helping them and to understand, well, what's going on? How can we be better at communication? And the conversation that Aden and I had was playful, insightful, and is going to be a must listen to episode of Coaching in Session. So I encourage everyone to stay tuned all the way until the end, because you're not going to want to miss this. Welcome, Aden Nepom, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for coming on and then sharing some of your wisdom, because you have done so much. You're the president of the Art of Change. You're the host of the Changed podcast, and you do TEDx talks, tools for communication. There's so much you do, but in your own words, can you please tell the world who you are and how you help?
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Aden. And I am all of those things, but the way I think about what I do is I help facilitate people's skills and thinking around how they're showing up in the way they communicate with each other at work. So I help people build their interpersonal dynamics so they can have a much more enjoyable work life experience. The founding of Art of Change was founded by my dad. He's a naturopathic physician. And what he noticed was there was just a lot of disease in the world that was caused by stress. And one of the biggest places we invest our time, energy, and effort is in the workplace. And then what it gives us back is often a high level of stress. And the main root of that is this way that we show up with each other. We fail to get our ideas across. We fail to get the yeses that we want from our colleagues, from our managers, from our investors. And we fail to live up to what we expect of ourselves because we're not clear on our vision, our mission, etc. So helping people develop their interpersonal skills around great communication, motivation, and influence can really alleviate a lot of the stressors that lead to disease in the body. And that's the idea behind what I do. But my experience is from this background in improv. So I do it in a way that's really present and in the moment, and sometimes even a little bit fun. Sometimes, depends.
So where would you say that the root of our communication issues come in, or the root of our self-care or our motivators come in, where people just remain complacent, they stay where they are, they don't become ambitious, they just allow the world to happen to them?
Oh, yeah. Well, some people allow the world to happen to them, and then some people like aggressively try and make the world obey their every whims, wish, and desire, and then run into brick walls in that way as well,
Hmm.
because the world is what it is. Um, I would say that at the root of so much miscommunication and misdirection in our own lives just comes from making faulty assumptions. We make
Mm.
all kinds of really unhelpful assumptions about ourselves and the world around us. And when we can shift our thinking a little and make helpful assumptions, it can open the doors to great relationships. It can open the doors to that difficult person at work actually being a real asset for you. It can open doors to understanding yourself better. So, making helpful assumptions instead of unhelpful assumptions is a big door opener, to use the same words I used a moment ago.
Hmm. No, that's fine. So people have this opening, right? Is it an opening of the mind per se, or maybe something happened bad in their life, like a negativity or trauma that caused them to say, I would like to change in my life?
Yeah, maybe. What I do is not therapy. So I don't really get deeply into the stories that people have or tell themselves about whatever happened in their past that led them to what they're doing. If a story helps you, great. But if that story is holding you back, let it go. It's not helping you. Tell a new story. What I find is that, for whatever reason, we just do this. I think, if you look at the way the brain works, we have this natural inclination to take shortcuts in our thinking so that we can just function. It's how our brains work. It's totally normal. It's where our biases come from. It's why we run into these things where we talk to the same people all the time about things, or we're interested in talking to certain kinds of people and we don't want to talk to other folks, or why we end up doing things in our behaviors, in our patterns of thinking that don't serve us, even when we've observed they no longer serve us. So you'll find yourself reaching for that same food, or staying up late even though you want to go to bed early. All these things happen because our brain takes these shortcuts as a matter of efficiency. So it absolutely is a mindset shift in order to do things differently. And to do that takes repetition, takes practice, takes effort and energy. But I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to have really useful relationships at work, to have really impactful conversations with the people you communicate with, and to live the best life that you can possibly live using the limited resources we all have on board.
Hmm. And you said something really interesting there, the behaviors that we have. So we have these behaviors that we just kind of do because we have already done them. Maybe it's easy for the brain or the mind to just keep doing what we're doing rather than do something different, because something different could be either change, and that's a lot of energy, or it could be a new task that we have to learn. So we
Mhm.
see, okay, well, I don't want to make anything new or to have a huge change, because that's going to be a huge adjustment for me. So I stay where I am, and that's going to be my life. The way we communicate with ourselves also has an impact too, because yes, we can communicate with our coworkers, our our family, but how we communicate with ourselves, I think, is going to be important also to get us to change or to get us to do something different.
Right.
Maybe similar to positive self-talk, right? Where we're saying, hey, let's do this because then we're going to have maybe a better life, or we're going to be able to achieve something different, right? I would like to talk about the difference between communicating with others and then communicating with ourselves.
You know, I, I'll just confess that I watch a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race, and immediately what popped into mind is, RuPaul's always like this with this catchphrase at the end of every episode: "If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anybody else?"
Mm-hmm.
And that may or may not be true. I actually think you can love lots of people, whether you love yourself or not. But to have a successful outcome, you have to also love yourself. In other words, like you were saying, Michael, I can have all of the best intent in the world in a communication I want to have with a coworker, or a pitch that I want to give to my work investors, or whatever. But if my self-talk is unhelpful, it's going to get in my way of having a successful outcome in that conversation. So think about it this way: a lot of times when people get on stage for a performance or to give a talk, they're thinking about themselves and worrying about themselves, and they don't notice the audience in front of them. And you can tell, you can see this in, I used to teach improv classes, and I would see this in my students all the time. Those beginner level students would get up there, and it's like there's a vacancy behind the eyes. They feel very checked out. They're not connected with you as an audience member. And what's going on for them is they're in their head going, I hope I'm okay. I suck at this. They all know I'm a fraud. All these kinds of really unhelpful thoughts that aren't grounded in truth, but are instead grounded in fear. And, that's where those unhelpful assumptions often come from, is that fear center, that place of worry. So, yeah, it's really great and important and helpful to take a moment, if you notice that happening for yourself, and breathe. Oxygenate your system. Take in some cleansing breath and check yourself. Go, okay, what would be a more helpful thing for me in this moment to tell myself? And my colleagues at On Your Feet, I'm also a senior facilitator and a director at On Your Feet Improv for Business. We often talk about get a helpful mantra, something that's in service of the people that you are communicating with instead of about yourself. So you can step out of that worry of what your churn might be, and instead get focused on what you really want or what can be of service to them. So, if you need one that you want to steal, write down, put it in your pocket for later. A really helpful mantra is, this can really help them, right? So if you're delivering a piece of information or giving a pitch, this can really help them. It helps you let go of what's going on inside of your own worries and concerns and focus on what you are there to do. But there's, you can imagine there's a million and one ways to create a helpful mantra for yourself. And that simple act of a short phrase that you can repeat to yourself over and over and over again, a little bit of an affirmation a la Stuart Smalley for those Gen Xers and older in your audience. Anything that you can tell yourself over and over and over again to help you get outside of your own worry and inside of whatever the moment is, that's a good thing to do.
The idea of walking onto stage, that stage fright's going to come in, the lights are going to be on, and you might only see the first row, maybe the first 2 rows of people, but the audience is packed.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to feel nervous. You're going to have a lot of maybe self-doubt. You're going to be talking to yourself saying, oh, I hope I don't mess up. I hope they like me, similar to how you were saying. What would be something that people can do to mitigate that? And I know you gave a really helpful mantra, right? This is going to help them, right? This is going to help them. Does passion play a role in that also? Because if I'm passionate about something and if I go on stage, my passion should be able to reach that audience. And if I'm passionate about something, I should believe in it. And I know, okay, I love talking about mindset. I love talking about coaching. If I go on stage and I'm talking about it, people can naturally feel, well, he's pretty passionate about this versus faking it to make it. And sometimes
Mhm.
people will try to make people love them. And that sometimes has the opposite effect where it's like they're trying to be someone they're not. And people can tell, like, okay, you're trying too hard. You're not the right person right now because I'm not getting a good connection. Right. So, how can that speaker, that person who wants to communicate with someone,
Mhm.
create a connection almost instantaneously saying, hey, let's have a conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. A couple things spring to mind just listening to you talk, which is, if you're not, my gut reaction was to go, if you're not passionate, what are you even doing there? And then I had to check myself because the reality is what I know from a lot of my clients is they are in sometimes roles in which they are not passionate about the work, but they still need to show up, right? We have this weird idea that everyone has the luxury of absolutely loving what they do, and that is why they are pursuing their career. But for many people, they love the life that they are living and they need a career in order to support their life. And I think that's totally okay. So the question is then, how do you tap into all of the qualities that make a passionate pitch feel good when you don't necessarily have that passion? And we actually have an exercise in the improv world that we do with our students to help them show up on stage with energy. Because Michael, if we were to list the qualities of how do we know someone is passionate, the things that show up on that list are actually things like, oh, they make a lot of eye contact. There's energy in their voice. There's a lot of modulation. They lean in when they talk. They raise their eyebrows. So there's all these things that happen when people speak in a way that's passionate. So one thing that you can do, and this is the improv exercise we do, is we'll take our students through and we'll have them partner up. And then we have them talk about something they're actually really passionate about and have their partner feed back to them. Here's what I noticed that you did.
Mm.
Then they talk about something work related. And then their partner says, here's what I noticed you did. So they get to see and hear directly some feedback about how they're showing up when they talk about certain things. And then we'll have them recombine their efforts. They'll talk about the work topic again, but with all of the body language of the passionate topic. Now, you were saying you don't want to just fake it till you make it. And I understand why that would seem a troubling sort of watch out kind of area to go into. That being said, what often happens for students in this exercise is they start and it feels weird. It should absolutely feel weird. You don't feel that passion. But what happens when they turn on those passion cues in their physicality is it feeds back to their own brain and they start finding passion for what they're talking about. And then by the end of their sentence, paragraph, whatever, they find that they're genuinely feeling excited about the work topic they're talking about. So there is an element of tapping into the cues in our body to cue our brain. This is something I want to bring some energy to. Help me find ways to do that. And you do that by simply starting there. If I was feeling energetic about this topic, how would that sound? I'll start there and see what my brain gives me. There's also this thing in the we tap into a lot of shortcuts in the improv world in the brain. So there's this thing where people talk about as new students, they're like, I went blank and I didn't know what to say. And we'll have them start. Now, you wouldn't do this in the workplace, it would look and sound strange, but these are practices for outside of these environments so that when you go into them, you feel prepared. But you have a student just start by making the shape of the letter sound anyone whatsoever. Whoa, buh, whatever it is. And the brain is going to automatically start filling things in for you because the brain's like, oh, we're engaging in speech. So it's this incredible thing. We have all these shortcuts in our brains. That's how it works so that we can function. And what we want to do is make helpful choices to help our brain help our brain, so to speak, our two brains, the one that's working unconsciously and the one that's working consciously. We want to help them find each other.
Mm-hmm. And I like what you said about like talking about something you're passionate about and then maybe talking about work. And you might not be passionate about work. Maybe you are lucky and you are passionate about work. And it's something we learn in college for being a teacher, or you learn in your student teaching. I'm a former educator, and we might go to a task or a job that the students might not like, and they're like, oh, we got to do this again. This is so terrible. I don't like this. How can we get them enticed? Well, we just use something they enjoy, and then we give them something they don't enjoy as much, right? But they learn to adjust eventually, right? So it's kind of like hot and cold, right? We have hot and we cold, but we want warm. So we put them together, we get warm. So we take something they like, that they might be passionate about, that they're energetic for, and then we give them something that they need to work on that's new for them, new for the brain. And they're like, this is a lot of work, but we do it maybe so after, or we use a motivator. So we do the task that they don't enjoy, but they have something to look forward to. So there's ways that we can trick the brain when it comes to trying to become better in a certain area, whether it be communicating, finding passion in something that we're not necessarily passionate about, because you might not be a good cook, for example, and you just don't want to cook because you're not a good cook. And maybe you have so much self-doubt. You're like, I'm not a good cook. I don't want to cook because everyone's going to taste my food and they're going to make fun of me, or I'm just wasting food. So we don't even try. But if we take the time to learn how to cook, then we could say, well, cooking is not so bad, right? So I'm enjoying cooking. I think, getting your feet wet into an area that you might not be 100% passionate about right now can open up doors. So yes, you might not be passionate about something naturally right now, but how do you know if you like something if you don't even try it? And many people try something once and then they have a bad experience, perhaps. So they have a presentation and they have a PowerPoint, the computer's not working, and now they're just, oh my goodness, the computer's not working, I don't have a backup. And now they were so worried about having this presentation that now they're checked out because they're trying to scrounge up a presentation out of thin air with no PowerPoint that they've been practicing all week or all night, whatever it was. So now they're saying, how can I improv here where I practice something, but now it's something totally different, right? And in the sense of communication per se, with people in the world, just out in public in society, it's kind of like improv, right? I don't know that person's temperament. I might talk to a stranger and they might hate me. So how do I deal with that type of communication when I'm talking to someone that I never met before and I'm presented with either good emotions or bad emotions from that person? How can I be a communicator that can help them open up versus them be closed off?
Well, Michael, I first thought I want to catch you out on something I just heard you say.
Mhm,
You were like, I might run into somebody and they might hate me.
mhm.
And I just want to point out that they might hate me is a super unhelpful assumption. There's absolutely nothing to be gained from assuming that somebody you might run into might hate you. I'm not saying it might not be true. I'm just saying it's not a helpful assumption. And that's exactly what I'm talking about at the top of the conversation here around making helpful assumptions versus unhelpful assumptions. It's equally true. They might love you.
Mhm.
So, which is also maybe, that's too far into assumption territory to assume that somebody's going to love you versus somebody's going to hate you. But my grandma used to say, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. So if I'm going to lean on an assumption, I'm going to lean on the one that I think is going to get me farther. And when it comes to our work relationships, conversations with strangers, I always, always, always suggest leaning towards the positive instead of something that's going to get in your way. An unhelpful assumption is anything that's going to tie you up, bind you, and get in your way from accomplishing what it is that you seek to accomplish, whether it's having a pleasant interaction or getting a yes on a deal. So that's thing number one, is really paying attention to what kind of messages are just showing up. Like notice more about what shows up in the way you think about and talk about things. And then as to the rest of it, I actually, before I get to the rest of your question, I was thinking, you were talking about presentations, and I was thinking about a client that I worked with last year who was this idea of passion versus not passion at work. And I'm re-examining what I said before. It's funny. I'm like, you guys are are getting a clear picture into how my brain works here.
Mm-hmm.
First, I said, if you're not passionate, what are you doing? And then I said, well, a lot of people have to do stuff they're not passionate about. But then I thought about this client, and you're passionate about something enough to keep you there. And that is what you can tap into. So this client was having to pitch a big change at a power company based on how the previous season had gone. He was in mitigation strategies for safety. I don't remember the name of the department, and that doesn't matter. But because of a lot of the things that had happened in that previous year, they were going to have to change some of their processes in this power company. And he was really afraid to give this pitch because he was feeling burned out from doing the work. He was feeling unheard about the stuff that, whatever. And he also was feeling a lack of confidence in his presentation skills. So what we worked on was I first just had him talk to me about why he started in that industry in the first place. Why was he in that work to begin with? What was the instigating incident that caused him to want to be there? And as he was talking about that, I could really hear strongly what it was he cared about. So it does sometimes help to have someone reflect back to you. It's not always easy and obvious to find these things for yourself, not because you can't, but because it takes time to sit and go into your mind palace and explore. And we often, as human beings, find it easier to do that with another person. We'll put the time on the calendar and make it happen, right? So we explored that, and what I heard from him was he really cared about a sense of service and duty. He was there because he actually wanted to serve the largest number of people as he possibly could. He had a military background, and duty and service were incredibly important to him. And once he had the memory of that fresh in his conscious mind, so it wasn't living in the unconscious anymore, he was able to realize why this presentation mattered. And it didn't matter if he was worried about himself or not, because this process was critical to saving lives, which he cared deeply about. So he was able to go pitch that process change. He was able to do that with confidence because it mattered so much. Whereas before he was really hung up on oh, they're not going to hear me, and I'm worried they don't want to spend the money for resources or whatever it was. But by the time he went and gave that presentation, knowing what mattered to him the most allowed him to do that with confidence. So he didn't have to fake it at all, and he didn't have to dig for passion. He just had to remember why he was showing up in the first place. So I wanted to bring that story up because, I think it ties so much into what we're talking about. But I'll also confess I forgot the question he asked right before I told the story, so you're going to have to refresh my memory.
Yeah, so the question was how can we get around when we have a different type of person, right? So we're talking to someone who might be negative, and going back to the unhelpful thoughts that we were talking about, this is for conversation too. We have an unhelpful thought that this person's not going to like us. How do we deal with people like that when we're going around? Now, of course, we can be positive, right? And we can say, well, this person might love me, right? And then we can go in that conversation, and then that kind of rubs off on the person. So they're like, oh, I actually like this person, versus, oh, I had such a bad day and I don't want to talk to anyone.
So are we talking about, just to let me clarify with you, are you talking about when we're having conversations with people we disagree with?
Well, I wasn't there yet. I was going to say just a stranger that you just meet at the grocery store.
Okay, stranger in the grocery store.
Grocery store that you meet, and you happen to have to communicate with this person for some reason.
Gotcha. Yeah, let's really paint the scene here. So we're in the grocery store. Are we in line?
Yes, we are in line. We're in line.
Okay, we're in line.
Yeah.
And this person turns and they say, what do they say?
And this person turns around and they say, can I have some space, please?
Okay, so this person wants some space. You are standing too close. And let me tell you, this was a thing before the pandemic, this need for space. Different cultures have different senses of how close to stand. I remember when I was living in Israel, I was standing in line to use the ATM, and I could not figure out why people kept going in front of me. I was like, I'm clearly next in line.
Mm-hmm.
How are these people just continuing to go in front of me? And it was because I was keeping that arm's length.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently I needed to be like in the ear of the person who was at the ATM. So, but
Yeah.
okay, so this person, you're in the grocery store, this person turns around and goes, hey, back off. I need a little space, please.
Mm-hmm.
So, as an improviser, you have three choices in any given moment. You can acquiesce to the offer at hand, and the offer is anything: facial cues, body language, words, anything that you can take and do something with, make a choice about. So, you could acquiesce to that, and you could just go, yeah, okay, and back off. And maybe that's the best possible choice in that particular example.
Yeah.
You could block the offer, you could go, no, and stand your ground. And you might imagine what that's going to get you.
Yeah.
That's going to get you quickly into a little bit of conflict. And then the other choice, of course, is to accept the offer and then do something with it. So that's where you acknowledge the offer out loud. Oh, you want more space. And then you make a choice about where to go from there. You could get curious. That's a choice. Oh, you want more space. Did I offend you? Is there something that I could do? In this particular example, it's probably just not worth the effort. Just back off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you have to gain from having this deep and meaningful conversation? Or you could say, oh, you want more space? Oh my gosh, I was infringing in your space. What a goofball. You can build relationship by acknowledging the reality a little bit more and building on that, growing it. But in any given moment, in any communication, any piece of communication, you always have the option to acquiesce, to say yes, add nothing, to block, or to build.
So, as you're speaking about like talking to that person in line, my teacher brain just started going because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in school we get a bully trying to bully someone, and they might
Right.
say, back off, you're in my space, when you're literally at your desk, not even worrying about them. You might just be looking the wrong direction when they looked at you. So we have that type of mentality where that person is just a negative person at that moment, where they might be looking for some type of attention. They don't care how they get it.
Right.
Now, there's a few ways we can do it, right? Similar to how you said, there's going to be ways we can escalate or de-escalate or just ignore it. Like we can just, like not even pay attention to the bullying, just continue on with our day.
Oh, sure.
Or we can inquire, well, how are you doing today? And then we're trying to get into their sense of thought process. And then we can really have a conversation per se with that person. So it's not a habitual problem. And what I find is that many people, when it comes to having a conversation with people, they get into a habit of, this is how I typically respond. And then they respond in that way. And I'm not saying it's all negative. I definitely won't say that. But depending on where you live, because here in America, you can live in New York, it's going to be different than you lived in the South. The South, they're very hospitable. You can talk to someone, anyone that you want to, and you're going to be welcome. There's going to be very few cases where you can't talk to someone. It's considered rude almost if you make eye contact with someone here in the South and you don't say howdy or hello.
Right.
You have to. And I'm from Connecticut, and we live in a little bubble in Connecticut, and people keep to themselves. We're not mean people per se. It's just that we have learned, well, this is my group. This is who I'm going to associate with. And anyone on the outside, I'm not going to associate with. But if anyone tries to come into my bubble and associate with my group or myself, that's a red flag, because that is how I was raised, or that's how the culture was in Connecticut. When I came to Texas, I would be sitting down at a table. Someone would just come, howdy, how you doing? And just start having a conversation. And I'm thinking, what does this person want from me? Number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to make sure this person, is shooed away as quick as possible, because they probably have an ulterior motive. So I'm thinking in my Connecticut brain, but I'm not in Connecticut anymore. So
Yeah.
I'm in the South now, where I'm like, okay, people are just naturally friendly. I remember one time I was walking into a restaurant and there was an electrician. He was like out working. He was probably like 50 feet away from me. And he just like stopped what he was doing. Howdy. He just started waving at us. And I was thinking in my head, like, shouldn't he be working? Connecticut brain versus Texas brain. Ah, Texas. Hey, how you doing? How's work going? difference in communication per region. So having someone who might be more friendly, like a Southern person versus a person up north, not saying that, people up north are all crabs, but there is a difference in the culture, right? So getting around that type of societal bounds that my upbringing was, I stay with my group of people. I don't talk outside of my group of people. And when I do have to talk outside of my group of people, it's typically a problem. I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to do it. There's so many avenues we can go down. So it's not at the point yet where I'm disagreeing with someone. It's more so of I have a different upbringing of communication, and now I have to be able to communicate effectively to anyone, regardless of region or culture.
Yeah, I recently left Facebook. January 1st, I left Facebook. But before that, one of my acquaintances through the improv scene here in Portland, Oregon, had posted something about how demeaning it is when someone calls you hun. And I lived in Texas for 9 years. And my experience of being called hun is totally a different experience than what she was talking about, kind of what you're talking about, these regional differences. In Texas, not in Austin proper, but you go to a barbecue restaurant out in, Grayford or somewhere, and you're going to get called hun.
Oh yeah.
And it's a place of kindness. It's it's an endearing moment. It's aren't we just like family kind of a moment. And here, this person in Portland was like, I could not be more offended by this person who called me hun. I am a grown woman and I am not a child. And only old women call children hun, or some like whatever bonkers territory she was in. And I say bonkers because to me, she was just making one unhelpful assumption after another that would have just led her down the path of being incensed and leading to conflict. And for what? Over what? What is there to gain from that particular level of outrage? So, knowing that these things are region specific, I think depends a bit on having traveled a bit. She's never been outside of Oregon, this person. So the culture here in Oregon is maybe similar to Connecticut. It's a little more closed off, and I suspect it's because the sun sets so early in the winter. Everyone just wants to go to bed and doesn't have the energy for you, right? They're like, look, maybe we can hang out in the summertime and have a conversation, but right now it just feels like a huge effort. Whereas in Texas, it's patio weather the majority of the year. So, it's like, even having differences in political opinions doesn't feel quite so seriously. It's like, grab a shiner and have a seat. Let's have a talk about how silly you're being, And here it's like, oh, you have a different political opinion than me. I guess we can't be friends anymore. So it's just, it's this really region specific stuff that makes it challenging to navigate. There's this way that my friend Asaf, who's an improv teacher and director in Austin, but he's a New Yorker originally. There's this way that he describes human communication that I think just about sums it up perfectly. Human communication is imperfect. Words are unsatisfying. Navigating human interaction will always lead to all kinds of results. Good ones, bad ones, awkward ones, fun ones, delightful ones, weird ones. And as improvisers on stage, that territory is where the comedy lives. The discomfort, the disconnect, the weirdness in human interaction. That's where the comedy lives. Now, out in the real world, sure, you can find comedy in your weird human interactions, but the stakes are so much higher, right? We're not going to get the laugh. We're not going to get the laugh. Out in the real world, we're going to get the job or not get the job. We're going to get the yes on the budget approval. We're not going to get the yes on the budget approval. We're going to keep the marriage or we're going to get divorced. The stakes are much higher. But I think understanding that human interactions are imperfect, and so am I, so are you, is helpful. Because it allows us, I think it's a helpful assumption that allows us to cut each other some slack, right? We can regroup, find more in common than we have different. And, I'm kind of a fan of pattern disruption. Like your previous example in the grocery store where someone's like, look, just back off and give me space. When you put it in context of like in the schoolyard with bullies, There are moments when you want to acquiesce and or just move along. But there are moments when you need to stand your ground too. If somebody's being overly aggressive, and to stand your ground with grace and a little kernel of love in your heart for the imperfect moment of communication can be a challenge, but can be a worthwhile challenge. So, you know, it's not saying go mind your business or no, I won't. But sometimes it's finding that moment of relatability.
Hmm.
Oh, you want me to back off? Don't you hate it when people are just really in your space? It's like, I hate that too. We're the same actually. I'm standing too close to you, but I don't like that either. I will back off because I don't want to be that person for you. But man, I was just tailgated on the way in here. I feel ya. The little bit of relatability can go a long way.
What I was thinking about is how communication has evolved from when we were kids or younger. When we were younger, we would ask maybe one or two questions and then we're friends. Hey, what's your name? Right? Or how old are you? Right? And then literally, as soon as we know your name or your age, you want to be friends? Versus adults, we don't have that conversation. We don't
Oh
just
my
go up.
God, that's amazing.
We
My
just don't.
daughter literally is like, oh, you're 9.5? We're the same.
Let's be friends. Versus adults, we might have kids, we might have, go to the same school, but it's kind of like, okay, you're an acquaintance. You're not a friend, you're an acquaintance. It's a shift. And of course, sometimes adults will say, well, let's have a play date with our kids, things like that. And then we create an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little bit better. And then we can say, okay, we like this person, we don't like this person, we like their kid, we want our kid to associate with that child. So we are basically delegating most of our relationships, right? Where we look at the relationship, is this going to be a healthy relationship for me? Am I going to get something out of it per se? At what point does communication shift? Is it when we hit teens or puberty where our emotions are just in an uproar and we're like, well, I don't care about mom or dad anymore. And I'm going to do me and I'm going to start hanging out with my friends more. And I'm, not going to hang around mom or dad because they're no longer cool. And it goes on, right?
It does seem like it shows up really early. The like, I don't want to associate here. I do want to associate there.
Mm. And then does that correlate to them being teenagers? Then now they're adults working in a career. They kind of carry on that, well, I don't want to be associated with this person because this person is embarrassing me. So they're not as open, right? They're more closed off. Do you think that's where communication gets tied or entangled, where we are more open when we're younger and then we kind of close off? But then when we're adults, again, we might have to open up depending on our career.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not an expert in childhood psychology or in human development in that way, but what I can tell you is that the more we attach our beliefs to our identity, the harder it is to have our mind changed. And the more we sort of feel like we are being attacked when people present us with conflicting information to the decision that we've already made. You can see this around all kinds of topics during this last couple of years, right? Politics, the pandemic, whether or not politics and the pandemic are the same thing or they're different things. Like people's strongly held beliefs around masking and vaccines, all of these things are great examples of how, when we attach our beliefs to our identity, it gets really challenging when somebody presents information that conflicts with the decision we've already made. So, people who, for example, wore masks because they were told it makes them a good person, right? People who were wearing masks, not because they were worried about themselves, but because they're wearing a mask because they really want to protect people around them. So they're like, I am a good person. Their unconscious mantra, I am a good person and I am helping the people around me. You show somebody like that some data that says masking isn't as effective as it should be. The amount that it mitigates the spread of disease is this type of disease is sadly a quite low percentage. They're like, don't show me that. I don't want to read that. I'm not going to change my mind about this because I am a good person and I'm doing this to protect my community. Likewise, people who held strongly held beliefs about I'm not going to wear a mask because wearing a mask means that I'm muzzling my free speech, my identity as a free citizen. You show them evidence that says, well, actually, in a society we have a social contract where we all do certain things that maybe we wouldn't do otherwise, like wear pants. In order to have a free and open society, we have these sort of compromises that we make as part of the social contract, and this is part of that. They're like, hey, don't show me that. I've already made up my mind about masking. So you see it really on both sides. And this is true all across the board. So as far as it being a childhood development thing related to like, I'm going to close my circle in, I think what we're really looking at is that sense of when I attach my beliefs to my identity. It is hard to look at things that conflict with that. So what people tend to then unconsciously do is surround themselves with people who have the same beliefs, who view the world in similar ways. And that's where we get that sort of confirmation bubble. And we do know this is well researched. We do know this is a thing that we do as communities. We want to feel safe. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel smart. So we surround ourselves with people who help us to feel that way. And if you think about teenagers and the relationships with their parents, parents' jobs with teenagers is to help prepare them for the real world. So when they're in little kids, right, there's lots of room for us to be like, hey, the stove is hot and that's not how to tie your shoes. Here, let me show you how to do it. When we get to teenagerhood, it makes sense that that role that the parent plays no longer feels good. So we're already sort of forming these confirmation bubbles. And then here comes mom being like, whoa, 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 that's not how you write a 5-paragraph theme. Sit down, let's go through this. And the teenager's like, don't tell me I'm not smart and that I'm not brilliant, that I haven't figured out the world. Like, so we run into that sense of conflict. So I think knowing that when people have a strong sense of identity tied to their belief system or their behaviors, I think knowing that can help you as a person trying to communicate with people. Find common ground so that there's a place where you're like, hey, guess what? We're actually on the same team. We're both humans in this world doing a thing, and we can be on the same side of the table looking at whatever it is we need to look at.
Right. Two things. First, let's talk about the pyramid of development. So from age 1 to 7, or from 0 to 7, children learn primarily from behaviors and environment. So they look at mom, they look at dad, look at grandma, look at their friends, they mimic behaviors. They also look at their environment, right? This is where I'm growing up. I have a house, I have this type of car, this is my normal, right? So when they see something that's not normal to them, they typically will ask, hey, why is it this way? All right. So for example, if they see a boy with no shoes, they might say, why does he have no shoes on? That's different for them because they always had to wear shoes. So from age 1 to 7, that's when they're learning from their environment and the behaviors. Then we get into like a kind of a area where it can kind of range depending on the development area, etc. But that's going to be values and beliefs. So that's going to also occur when they're able to comprehend and have a communication. So it could be from 4 to 9 when that starts to happen. And then at 10, that's where the subconscious is almost fully developed. And then now they're starting to think for themselves. And then that's the tippy top of the pyramid, their identity. So they're at 10 years old already creating their identity, who they want to be, who they want to present themselves to the world. So what they have done is they have compiled a wealth of knowledge from the past 10 years of their life. They're going to say, well, 10 years of my life, I have so much experience. I know everything. Then that's when teens come. I know everything. You don't have to tell me about these paragraphs. I know what to do. So
That
they
makes
create.
sense. That makes sense.
Yes. So they have this identity that they developed, and then for them to change that is going to require either a trauma typically or something like that along those lines, or if the parent does a good job at helping them understand how the world works versus being controlling, right? There is a difference between a parent saying, you have to do it this way because I say so, or this is how the world operates. What would you like to do with that? Right? There's a difference because now they have a say in what they choose versus, hey, this is this way, right? So going against them, especially when they're at the most emotional peaks of their life, is going to be a fight that we're not going to win at the end, because they get the final say of what they want, because they can like us at the end, or they can say, I'm just not going to talk to you for 3 years, and they just are miserable for 3 years. Well,
Yeah.
it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, right? Because maybe we're like, oh, finally some peace. Or we can say, I miss my child, right? So it just depends on the parent too. Then we get into the other aspect. And this is similar to how you were talking about, like if someone's wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, right? There's a thing called the hero syndrome. And the hero syndrome is we all kind of want to be a hero deep down inside, where we want to be the good guy. We don't want to be the bad guy. And then if you even think about it, there's some bad guys that we would associate with that consider themselves good guys. All right. So the hero syndrome is we are always looking for an enemy. We're always looking for someone who is against us. And then this person we either don't associate with, or we say, you know what? I'm going to go against what this person believes because it counteracts my belief. So we create this, basically this divide between people because we think we are thinking in the right manner. My belief or my choice is the right choice, their choice is the wrong choice. So we cannot associate with people. And one of the last questions I want to ask you is that cordial conversation where you and we can have different beliefs, and I'm sure you and I can have a cordial conversation. And it's not just because this is being recorded and it's going to be viewed by thousands of people. We have the opportunity where you can say, no, Michael, you're wrong and I'm right. And we can have an argument or a conversation about it. That cordial aspect is almost like a lost art form. What would you say about being cordial in today's society versus maybe back when you were younger?
Oh boy, do we have another half hour?
We do.
Because I have so much I could say about this. First of all, when it comes to that hero syndrome, I had a great conversation with a fellow improviser who I used to perform with, who's now doing consulting work. She lives in Southern Oregon, Julie Gillis. We talked on the Changed podcast about the hero-centered journey, which is something we study in improvisation, and whether or not you're the hero in your story, or are you actually a supporting character in somebody else's story? Because like you said, we have this tendency to view ourselves as the hero in our own story, even when we view ourselves as the victim in the story, which many people do. So, if people are interested in that conversation, go check out that episode of the Changed podcast, and I'll make sure that you have a link to that episode if you want it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that came to mind. But when it comes to cordiality or the art of discourse, we have lost it certainly in this country. And I think this is true across the globe to degrees, varying degrees. I think discourse is still alive and well in some countries, but here in the US, we are really, really losing it. And I think it's easy to point fingers at social media having really brought some bad habits to the way we interact with each other, where we sort of like blast our point of view, we get a bunch of likes, and then we go, that's proof that I'm correct. And then we really sort of close off to other people. But there may be other things at play. When I think about how headlines grab our attention in the news, they're now very much in this like, here's this statement. Want to know more? Here's this bold accusation. Is it true? Here's this horrifying reality. But is it really reality? It's like this is all these sort of clickbait headlines. This is just how the news cycle works now. And the idea that all of us are reading the same news sources and gathering the exact same information that we're then going to talk about when we get together, that ship seems to have also sailed. There's so many different news organizations and magazines and online and print and whatever, mostly online. Some are still alive in print and not online at all. Did you know that? I'm going to have a magazine article out about me in the next month in a print magazine. I was like, whoa, I didn't know those still existed. So it's like we're not all reading the same things, and everyone is trying to increase profits. So all of these magazines and news organizations, every single one of them has profit at its core. So they want clicks, they want people to read. And it's, I think, a helpful mantra to view everything as entertainment. Like they are trying to titillate the mind with their headlines. So, the old what's the word I'm looking for? Axiom, motto. Um,
Adage.
the adage, yeah, the old adage was if it bleeds, it leads.
Hmm.
And it's gone well beyond that now. So we're not all getting the same information and we're not all getting the same interpretation. And then left to our own critical thinking skills to evaluate what it is we're thinking about, how we'd like to talk about that with each other. Instead, we're being told, depending on what you're reading, what to think. And then we come with this like talking point. It's like, okay, I think this, and here's the talking point. And you don't question where that conclusion came from or how you got there. And this art of cordiality is really about curiosity. It's, I have this point of view and I want to hear yours. And here's what I notice is different about our point of views. Here's what I notice is the same about our point of views. Instead, it's here's this conclusion that I adhere to, and here is why it's right. Here's a talking point about it. Please don't say anything that's different than that, or I'm going to be mad at you. Mm-hmm. Oh, you just said something that's different. You're shunned. I can't deal with you because I have 1,000 likes on my comment. So it's, that's, I think, an oversimplification, but that's sort of how I view it. But I think that there are things that can be done. I teach this workshop called Reason in an Outraged World, having meaningful conversations with people, even when you disagree with them. And what it really is all about is understanding why you're having the conversation in the first place. If your objective in engaging with somebody that you disagree with is to feel right, to make yourself the hero, and prove how smart you are, these are unconscious objectives, but you know when they're showing up. If you think back on your previous conversations, you'll know. If those are your objectives, you're not going to have a fulfilling conversation that builds a long-term relationship where you may or may not change that person's mind, but you're more likely to. It's just going to yield a result where in the moment you get incensed, you walk away going, yeah, and that's how I know I'm right. And it's a really it's like a drug. You get this like endorphin rush from it, and then it's over, and that relationship is gone. I would suggest that more valuable is to explore the good thinking, make a helpful assumption that that person has good thinking behind their conclusion they've drawn that is different from your conclusion. And while you may continue to disagree with their conclusion, you can value their good thinking and learn something from it. And I think when we are willing to have our opinion changed as a person entering into a conversation where we have differing points of view, if you can demonstrate a willingness to be changed by what you hear, people will follow suit. They'll be interested in what you have to say and demonstrate a willingness to be changed as well. It is a humbling experience when you are laying out your point of view and somebody says, I never thought about it like that. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. Would you be willing to hear my thoughts on this? Because they're very different from yours. Would you be willing to hear them? It's a humbling experience, and it's so much different than when somebody goes, you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you why you're wrong, and you're an a-hole, and you're an idiot, and I'm going to prove it. It's just a different experience. Who's going to raise their hand and be like, oh yeah, please. I love it when somebody calls me names. Like, let's just keep doing that. It's fantastic. Nobody says that. So when somebody genuinely shows interest in being changed and in being curious and then in wanting to share from this perspective, this helpful assumption that we have something to give each other, it is a door opener. And I am a fan of opening doors to human communication instead of closing them.
Yeah, and that openness for communication is going to lead us back to a stronger communication with our society, with our fellow peers, coworkers, whoever, because we're not going to say, well, my belief is my belief. And if you oppose it, then we can't be associated. So I'm willing to learn from you. I'm willing to hear what you have to say. And then, of course, if I'm willing, there's a good probability that you're going to reciprocate that and say, yes, you can tell me what you believe too. And then we can figure out, okay, yeah, I kind of like where you're going more so than how I was thinking. There's nothing wrong with changing your belief. And many people feel like they can't backtrack of what they said because then they will be ridiculed or Maybe they will feel like, well, I'm going against who I am
Right.
versus they're trying to figure out who they are. So we have to figure out who we are. And then once we have a good understanding of that, then we can modify things here and there. But it always goes back to being open, willing to learn. And it's not so much about getting the last word, because if someone wants to get the last word, then that communication is going to be difficult. Because do you just say, okay, not a problem, and then walk away and then allow them to think they won? Or are you going to feel like I need to be the person that gets the last word, that makes sure that my point is getting across to them? It just depends on the
Yeah.
type of person you are.
It also depends on the context, right? So if I'm having a conversation with somebody at the dinner table and we disagree politically, what do we have to gain from that conversation other than learning about somebody else's point of view? We're not going to make a policy decision in that course of that conversation. We're not going
Right.
to, if we solved all the world's problems in the course of that conversation, that'd be incredible. But then we have to find somebody to tell and get them to listen to us, right? So, the likelihood of any sort of meaningful outcome coming from that, other than the relationship building that comes from being heard, I can't think of what it would be. So, the family dinner table is the place where this often shows up, and or social media, and or wherever. But there's this thing that people sort of dig into their perspectives as if they are poised to make a huge, massive difference in that moment. And, quite frankly, you're likely not. So my suggestion is use that as an opportunity to build relationship when conflict shows up in that setting. Now, when it comes to policy decisions, places where people disagree and there is something at stake, you don't have the luxury of going, I'm just here to explore your point of view and maybe I'll have my mind changed. That being said, getting clear on what somebody else thinks, believes, how they came to believe that, what they're considering, really understanding all of that will help you formulate a solution far faster than simply digging in on your own point of view. So the behavior is the same, the objectives are nuanced. And ultimately, when it comes time to make a policy decision, right, when they're negotiating a deal at the leadership level of an organization or a country or wherever, what they have to do is they have to get on the same side of the table and look at the problem together and understand that what they are seeing are different aspects of the same problem. And as long as they can do that, they can come up with a deal. It takes time, it takes negotiation, but they have to understand that they're looking at different aspects of the same problem. So that's the nuance. When we take it to that level, when we're like, okay, I'm at work and I work for a shoe company, we're on the design team, you want to do a blue shoe, I want to do a red shoe. Like we have to, and this person's trying to do a calico shoe. We need to have a conversation together and understand we're looking at different aspects. Why do you want to do a blue shoe? Why do you want to do a calico shoe? What is it about these color choices and these design ideas are impactful and meaningful to you, and why? How did you come to those conclusions? What if we did this with these ideas and we end up with a yellow shoe instead? It's like, what if? But you have to, in order to move forward, because that's what really matters out in the work world, is how do we move forward knowing that we're coming at these things with differing points of view. Whereas the dinner table is more like, it's still the same question, how do we move forward knowing we have different points of view? Over here, we're looking at the problem, we're negotiating a conclusion. Over here, at the family side, we're just using this as an opportunity to build trust and relationship with each other, and understanding that we have these differences. So, those are the nuances, and I tried to sum it up in less than a half hour. But,
Yeah.
Ultimately, when it comes to human interaction, interpersonal communication dynamics, understanding that we're not taking in the same information, and even if we were, we would still reach different conclusions, is really an opportunity to explore, to get curious, and to learn. And maybe be changed by what you hear. Just have that possibility in the back of your mind. It's okay, like you said, it's okay to change your mind. Most people change their minds a lot as they go through their lives. So, making room for that is okay. I personally reserve the cutting out of friendships for really egregious stuff. For the most part, my friendships, I seek out points of view that are different from mine. I find it fascinating and interesting to learn about other people's view of the world, and I hope I always do.
Hmm. I love what you said. It's so powerful, that last little segment. And communication has changed in our world from when we were younger. And we do have to learn the tools of communication. And I know working with you, people are going to get right on track where they can say, how can I be a better communicator, whether it be doing public speaking events, being in front of bosses, CEOs, or just at the dinner table with your family. That type of communication takes effort. And as long as you can understand, okay, am I communicating effectively? That's going to be powerful. So, what I want from you is just to get a few last words and then please share with how people can find you.
Sure. I guess I'll leave you with this last thought, which is, change is something that's at the heart of our lives. We are constantly changing. The reason the company that I have is called Art of Change is not because I'm specifically a change management consultant. I'm not. I deal in communication skills and interpersonal dynamics. But the reason for that is because the way we communicate with each other, the way we relate or choose not to relate, impact the changes that we go through as an organization, as a company, as a people, and as individuals. So really thinking about how we show up for these communications and how we want to show up, what we want to get out of these experiences, I think is really, really important. And if you are interested in bringing me into your workplace or organization in order to help you work on these skills, you can learn more at artofchange.com. And if you're interested in working with me one-on-one on a specific set of skills, maybe you're looking to increase your influence with your coworkers, or you'd like to learn to manage up, or you'd like to get more motivation out of your direct reports. I do occasionally work with people one-on-one, and you can learn more about that in the coaching tab. But for everybody, for anybody, there is on that page, there's a assessment that you can take for yourself for free that will help you think about some of the challenges that you've been running into. And it's just an opportunity to answer some questions for yourself. And if we end up working one-on-one, then I often will look at that as a good jumping off point for where our conversation would start. But the assessment itself is free and it's an opportunity to reflect. I encourage everyone to go there, spend the minutes thinking through how you've shown up, what gets you the result that you've been getting, and what you would like to be doing differently.
Wonderful. So, the president of Art of Change, she helps people with becoming better communicators. And of course, if you need anything, all her information is going to be in the description box below. Thank you so much, Aden Nepom, for coming on.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
When I was looking into your eyes, wasn't love at first sight, fire burning bright.
I would like to thank my guest, Aden Nepom, for coming on Coaching in Session. So much words of wisdom, so insightful, and you can tell she loves what she does. And when you find someone who's passionate about the work they do, it's easy to conversate with them. It's easy to understand that they have the best intentions for whoever they work with. So I encourage everyone to check out her information in the description box below and to reach out to her, whether just to say hello, saying that you heard her on Coaching in Session, or to say, hey, I'm looking to become a better communicator. What can we do? And maybe it's not so much about the individual aspect of it. If you're a CEO, if you're a business owner, and you're looking to have someone come in and talk to the team to make the team more effective, well, that's not only going to make the workplace environment more friendly, but it's also going to boost productivity. And what person wouldn't want a business that's more productive? So much that you can get from her. There's so much in this episode. And I encourage everyone to share the video and or audio because we're trying to help people become better, not only in mindset, but in all aspects of their life. So I will see everyone on the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone, take care.